All right, so we are recording now. I want to welcome everyone to the first in our webinar series for the Boston Marathon. My name is Reem Jishi, and I'm the operations director of the Run Formula and also a coach with the Run Formula and Outrival Racing. I am a certified personal trainer as well, so some of the program today will focus on strength and movement drills. So just bringing that background. So today, like I said, is the first of 4 webinars. Next week will be on race fueling, and we'll have Beth Peterson will be giving that webinar. And then week 3 is about taper and pre-race logistics and also a course preview. And then the final week will be on pacing. So this webinar is recorded. It will be available after the fact, posted on the YouTube, the QT2 Systems YouTube site. And you'll also get an email from us after with the link to this webinar and also a link to the Run the strength, the stability and mobility program that I'll go through at the end of this webinar, and the link to next week's webinar. So let me just, I think I just had someone come in. Okay, so just starting with presentation overview. This is what we'll cover today. Why are run mechanics important? Some common deficiencies that we see in people, capturing and analyzing video, utilizing advanced running metrics that are on your watch, and then addressing the limiters. I should also mention here that if you have any questions, if you can type them into the chat box, that would be great. And then after the fact, after I'm done presenting, I'll also open it up so you can ask any questions live. For now, everyone is on mute though. So if you want to come off mute, you'll just have to let yourself off. So running speed, it comes down to 2 things. How fast you run depends on your stride rate and your stride length. So your stride rate or your cadence is the area that we focus on the most. That's where your running technique plays into part. Once you get the stride rate down, then length comes to increase your speed. You get that from length, and that comes from extending out back behind you rather than reaching out for a bigger stride in front of you. So why are run mechanics important? They can increase speed, but really more importantly, they can reduce your fatigue. So a lot of the time run mechanics, they start out, everything looks okay at the beginning of a run. And then as you get more tired, things start breaking down. So if you can work on your mechanics, you can hold off that fatigue. And that also reduces your likelihood of injury if you're running with better mechanics. So we're pretty close to race day here. So one guidance that I just wanted to say is that right now, 6 or 7 weeks off from race day, the goal is not to materially alter your run mechanics. That's not something that you want to do. Okay, so, but the goal is maybe to come back to run form that you had a few months ago before you started training more, or just to be a little more aware of what you're doing. Maybe you see, like we'll talk about the video, that you look at your running technique when you're fresh and you're like, oh, okay, that looks pretty good. And then you look at your running technique 8 miles in or 15 miles in and it starts falling apart. So what can you do to prevent it from falling apart to have you finish strong? So that's the goal. If after you're done racing Boston, you want to come back and really look at your running form and say, okay, I want to make some changes to this, that's a good time. But I definitely just want to note that now is not the time to make any big changes. So common deficiencies that we see when we look at running technique: poor extension, and that's how far you extend your hip extension behind you. Upper torso position, and here we're looking at your forward lean. A lot of people tend to run upright, or we also see lean at the waist rather than the ankles. And then we're also looking for excessive curvature in your back. And then hip drop, so that's a sign of lateral weakness. So one hip is falling below the other. And lack of shoulder rotation if you're running square rather than actually moving your shoulders with your arms as part of running. And then the last one, a common deficiency, is a dropped arm position, which is sometimes an issue in and of itself, and sometimes it's a compensation mechanism for something that's going on in your lower body. Okay, so the first part of this presentation is going to look into taking run video and then what we look for in run video. So when you're capturing the video, so you can do video with just your iPhone or whatever, smartphone that you have. It doesn't need to be any kind of fancy camera. The views that you want to look at is just an overall assessment from the front. So if someone's videoing you, you're running head on into the camera. Then side views, looking at both sides, because we tend to, sometimes one side looks okay, but the other side doesn't. So you want to try to look at both. And then your rear view and potentially a bird's eye view. So looking from up above, that one, unless you're at a physical therapy office, that one tends not to be. So for me, when I do run videos, I look at front, side, and rear view. And so when you're capturing the video, some considerations here. The first one is pace. So what do you want to look at here? And I would say that now, as you're training for a marathon, that the pace you should look at is the pace that you're going to race at. That's the most relevant pace here. So start with a good warm up and then go forward and do your video at your marathon pace. The next question is fresh or fatigued. And here my recommendation is that you look at both of them to see if your technique changes from when you're fresh to when you're fatigued. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, you're not looking to make giant changes to your actual technique right now, but it's important to see if things start falling apart with time, so you can look and really, be conscious of it, and also work on, see what it is, and try to strengthen up before race day. The next consideration is your shoes. And here people, often run in multiple shoes, whether they train in one shoe, race in the other. So you might also want it to take video in different shoes to see if there's any change in your run technique based on the shoes that you're wearing. And then the last question is treadmill or road. It is far easier to take video on a treadmill, but it's more useful, I think, to look at yourself as you're running on the road. So I recommend that you do it on the road if you can. I just do find out that helps more to see what's going on. Okay, and then we're going to use the video to address the video and also some information that you can get from your watch to look at what your potential limiters are. And the limiters fall into three categories, really. One is strength or stability. And here we're talking more your lateral stability, your side to side strength. The second one is mobility, how well you move forward and backward. And then the third one is cognitive and mental. And so here what we're talking about is, do you know that you're supposed to do something when you run? Like, that's the first question. If someone says to you, well, do you know that you're tilting your head down when you run? And you say, oh, where am I supposed to have my head? Like, that's one of the questions. Do you know what's going on with your arms? So, well, what should my arms be looking? So the first thing is just an awareness of what you want, what outcome you want. And then the second piece of that is actually doing it, is thinking about that, and what are the triggers that you can have in your mind. When I start getting tired, what can I tell myself to trigger myself back into run technique? So, and that's what we're looking at here. Okay, so the first thing that I look at when I'm looking at video is foot strike here. And there's two pieces of that. There's how and where. So the how part is what I'll start with first. And here it's just, you're taking a look. Here you look from in front and behind. You get most information from the rear view on this one. And the question is, well, how am I landing? Am I landing on my heel, my midfoot, my forefoot? And you don't, as a distance runner, your forefoot's not where you want to be landing, but heel or midfoot they both work. There's runners that do both things. I know that there's schools of thought out there that have said, if you're a heel striker, you should really become a midfoot striker. For me, I don't do that. I usually don't change or try to advocate people changing from one to the other, but more to try to have your foot strike work within that look better, whether you're landing heel or midfoot. It is useful to know if one side is landing one way or the other, because if you're landing differently on your feet, then there's chances are there's an imbalance or compensation going on there. The next thing is looking at pronation, and some pronation, you want some pronation. So there's always some rolling in. That's normal. You land on the outside of your heel, you roll in, and then you toe off in your second toe. So there's movement in your foot. It's not just a totally flat foot. But what we want to look for here is whether you're overpronating, if you're rolling in too much, or if you're supinating, if you're rolling out too much. And again, looking at your different feet to see if you're doing one on one side and one on the other. So if you're overpronating in one foot and supinating in the other, you're probably tilting to the side that you're supinating on too. So it's useful to look at both of them. Another thing just to look at is if your feet are pointed in or out. A lot of people will run duck-footed, and that's another indicator of some lateral instability. And then, so once we look at that, we'll look at what the limiters are, what's causing the problems. And in all of these, you'll see that basically the limiters are really the same. They're either that you have poor mobility through your hips, or through your calf muscle, toe, or that you're weak side to side. It usually comes down to it. So a lot of the exercises, it may manifest in different ways, and you may see it in yourself in different ways, but the limiters tend to be similar for people. So we will go through exercises that you can do for both at the tail end of this presentation. So the next question, and this one's pretty more significant now, which is where does your foot land when you strike? So here, what you're looking for in the video is where does your foot land relative to your body? So your goal here is that your foot should land as close to directly under your pelvis as possible. It is not going to be under your pelvis. That's like almost impossible for that to happen, but you don't want it way out in front either. The further, because where we load when your foot lands, and as it works through underneath you, and then you unload with your kick out in the back. So it's important to load and to get that foot down on the ground and have some ground contact time. What we don't want though is if the foot lands in front of you and you're overstriding, then you end up with a lot of braking. There's too much time on the ground. You end up usually with a bent knee further. The ground contact time is greater, usually resulting in the cadence slowing down. So that's something to look out for. And when people try to go faster, a lot of the time they try to do it by reaching out in front of them. And that's something that you want to try to avoid. You want to think about keeping your feet more directly underneath you when you're running. And then another issue that comes here with overstriding is sometimes really high vertical bounce. So you spend more time going up than you spend going forward. Well, that's not true entirely, but you spend too much of your time going up rather than going forward. So the goal is to keep your momentum in a forward direction rather than being bouncy. The foot strike is impacted by your upper torso position. So if you're able to get that lean forward, it helps to get your foot underneath you, but it's also really impacted by your hip extension. If you're unable to get your hip, your leg back behind you, then you're going to be unlikely to be able to get the foot to land where you want to in front of you either. So here the limiters are your soleus flexibility. So you're the long muscle in your calf, your hip flexor flexibility, and then cognitive. Again, it's knowing that you want to be able to keep your feet in front of you rather than trying to increase your speed by reaching out in front of you. So that's just an awareness issue. Okay, so the next thing that we look at here is the hip extension. Now we've talked about this quite a bit already. So so what you're analyzing here is how far behind your body does your leg extend. during the recovery phase. So you're looking from a perspective here. So I've taken a video, and I should have mentioned before that the video, you take it with whatever, right on your iPhone, it's perfectly fine. Then you can upload that or have someone upload it into Coach's Eye, which is the software that I use. There's other ones out there, but Coach's Eye is an app on the phone. It's really easy to use. And then what I do when I'm looking at people's videos is that I just go ahead and take screenshots. I spend a lot of time looking at the video first, just getting an overall assessment. Then I do screenshots, and then I do some measurements here. So when we're looking at hip extension, that's measured at the push off on your back leg. So you look at the point where you're just about to come off the ground, and then you're measuring versus vertical. So you're looking for a minimum of 16 degrees. This picture is of me, and it's done at like 3K pace. So my hip extension is going to be more at 3K pace than it would be at marathon pace. So this is a pretty big extension, but here you're looking, and you want to look at both sides, because you might see a difference of, 3 or 4 or 5 degrees, because one hip flexor is tighter than the other one. So it's something you definitely want to look to both sides. And your limiters here tend to be, again, the same kind of thing, your calf flexibility and your upper quads. So having good hip extension is important, because it will give you a nice, if you have good extension, you'll get a nice recoil, which will help you snap forward, keep your cadence quicker, and get your foot to land out in front of you. So this is definitely an important thing. When you're looking at hip extension, you also want to look too that sometimes you'll see people have good hip extension, and then you look up at their back and you see a really big curvature in the back. If the curvature is coming, the extension is coming because your back's curved, then that's something you want to like focus on with your upper body to try to get your body alignment a little better. Okay, so going to the next slide. So here are just a couple other videos looking at hip extension. So with here the runner on the right side has, good, definitely within range. And she's running at about a Z1 run in here. So you don't expect quite as much extension, but her upper body is really upright. But what's nice about this is that her back is really flat too. So you don't see any curvature here. While in the runner on the left, you see the hip extension is less, but you also are seeing a reasonable curve in her spine. And so this is just, even though these two numbers are not that different from each other, the runner on the left is tighter through the hips, is what the back curvature there indicates. Okay, so I mentioned before that the good hip extension is going to result in a higher recovery. So if you look at this, the runner, in this case, me, who had the biggest hip extension, I've got the highest recovery. And then as you go on, you see how it plays out. And ideally, what you want to see is, if I was looking from the front on the recovery, that I shouldn't be able to see the leg below the knee. So you want to make sure that you're at least sort of like even with the ground as you come up. If your leg's dragging on the ground, then you end up with a really long lever, which is just harder. It's harder to move a long lever than a short lever. Okay, so that was the forward and back movement. So with hip extension, it is about, it's about mobility, how well you move in the forward and back direction. The other area with the hips is now side to side. And so this, where we're looking at here, and on this one, you want to look at this from the rear shot, and you're looking at whether or not you have any hip drop. And for this one, you're measuring it at the point of weight transfer onto the front leg. And you measure from horizontal, so up from your hip on the waist and you look for like a line to see if you drop down. And again, you'll look for differences between the two sides. Let me just go to the next slide where I'm measuring here. So this is me, and both of the numbers here that we see are perfectly within range. They're definitely, they're not like crazy amounts of hip drop. They're less than, you're looking for less than 10 to 12 degrees. So 10 is not great, but it's not like a terrible amount of hip drop. But what's more significant here is that my sides are different. So I'm running imbalanced. So here you see the hip drop on the left is more than the hip drop on the right. And what that indicates is that my right hip is weaker than my left hip is. And if you see me run, you'll see also it ties in that, at least at this time, I've worked on this quite a bit since here, is that I overpronate with my right foot, I supinate with my left. So my whole body starts sort of leaning over to the left side when I run. And so the goal is to try to bring everything back up to center. And to do that, you want to work on your lateral stability. So the muscles on the outsides, primarily on the outside of your glutes and upper leg is what you're working on. Okay, so going back to forward and back, and this is the upper torso position. So here you look at this in the same, basically the same frame as you would with the leg extension. So you're looking for a tall body with a forward lean. So the lean comes here from the ankle rather than the waist. So you want to see someone who's nice and tall, and that the lean comes through the body rather than it being bending at the waist. You're leading with your chest, not your shoulders, so to speak. So the forward lean is great because it gives you that forward momentum. If you think about it, if you stand tall and you're just standing straight up and down, you're not going to go forward, you're not going to go backwards. As you start leaning your body, keeping your body tall, sooner or later you're going to have to step, and you'll have to keep on stepping, otherwise you'll fall flat on your face. So the forward lean gives you the extra forward direction here. It also, we talked about, helps you get your feet under your body a little bit better. So you want to measure here from vertical, and then you measure to your ear, and it's how far forward you're looking, and you're looking for 5 to 10 degrees. It's not a massive amount of lean, but it is definitely a forward tilt, and it's something that you'll see too. You'll see more lean the quicker, the higher your pace is. And again, you want to look at differences between the two sides to see if there's more lean on one side or the other, to look for imbalances. And the limiters here, soleus flexibility through your calf muscle, and cognitive. Sometimes the forward lean is all about awareness, and it's first, oh, I didn't know that I was supposed to do that. I didn't know that I was supposed to lean forward. So that's one of them. And then more the mental piece. Oh, I'm getting tired. When people get tired, they tend to fall back on their heels a little more because it's just safer. It's slower. It's a safer place to run. So people tend to lean back on their heels. So if you see yourself and feel yourself getting tired and feel yourself pulling up, well, what are you going to say to yourself? How are you going to bring yourself back forward again? Because it's actually more efficient to run with yourself lean forward. Okay, so here are just a couple examples of underleaning and improper leaning. So the runner on the left, I showed you here before that she's pretty upright. And this might just be a product of the speed, or that she's running on the treadmill rather than outdoors, but she's completely upright in this. So when I go to run the vertical line, I'm running it straight through the center of her head, down her ear, and there's nothing even to measure on that. And then the runner on the right is trying to get, this is pretty early on her run, she's trying to get speed. So she's bending at the waist, and she's leaning back into it, and she's way overleaned. You lean like this and you end up basically falling forward rather than driving forward and in the direction that you want to go. So you're not looking for this like extreme lean ever. Okay, next one I want to look at is arm position. And so ideally what you're looking for is less than 90 degrees consistently through your whole run stride. So I've seen in people where they're like kind of make chopping sounds. So when they go and they put their arm back, they extend out their back and then they bend it as they're coming forward. You don't want that. You want a nice, just even bend that's somewhere less than 90 degrees. So this is an example of a really nice bend. You're also here, just arm is bent, hands are inside of your elbows, chest is open. And you want to look again for differences on this one, differences between your two sides, because sometimes a lowered arm, especially if it's lower in one position on one side, is because it's trying to make up for a hip weakness. So if for me, as I showed, my right hip is weaker, so my left hip is dropping, my right arm is going to try to drop to bring me back up to center, to try to compensate for that. So if you go and you're looking and you see one of your arms dropping, take another look at your hips and see if anything is going on. Sometimes arm bend though is cognitive. It's not, again, not being aware that you're chopping with your arms, not being aware that your arms are open. So you want to just be aware of that. And one little trick I found here, I find really helpful, is to take my fingers and touch them with each other. And just touching the fingers together brings a more of an awareness of what's going on in your arm. I actually had one runner that I worked with who I'll actually show later, and her arm position was really open. She was chopping and it was open through a lot. And the first thing that I did with her, I didn't see it tied to her hips. Her hips looked okay. So all we did was focus on her arm position and trying to increase the bend, and her cadence went up 10, just like that. I mean, because it really was just not an awareness of what was going on with her arms. It wasn't indicating something else. So that was a pretty easy change there. The other thing that we look at with arms is actually your shoulder rotation. And from here, just see. Yeah, I'm going to wait to show you that on another side. So here's the runner I was talking about with this really big bend. And so just getting that bend from 132 degrees up to like under 90 made a really big difference in her cadence. And that's an easy change, because your arms are, the longer the arms, the same thing with the leg, the longer the lever, the more time it takes to come around. And so you don't want your arms to be limiting your legs. Okay, so the next thing here is on shoulder rotation. So what you want to see when you're running is you want to see your elbows pointing straight back. When you're in recovery, the elbow should be pointing back. That means that there's going to be some rotation in your body. So it's a core rotation that's happening here as you pull back. So that might, on first blush, if you're looking at it from the front, look like your arms crossing over in the front, but it's actually not. What's happening if you're just rotating is that one arm pulls back, the other arm is going to come almost to midline and come back. And as you move, it'll change. But so your elbow is pulling back like it's on rails and someone's pulling at you and it's pulling back behind. So nice and tight here. It's not an actual swing of the arm. It's completely because of the rotation. And that's having the strength through having the core strength will help keep your run active and keep you running tall. So it's important to focus on the core strength here, and then keep that nice, tight, streamlined arm position. Okay, the last thing on the video is head position. And here you're just looking for neutral with your body. Your eyes are forward or slightly down. The important thing here just to notice is that head position affects your body position. So if you're leaning back, you're looking up too high, looking up towards the sky, your whole body, your back is going to start curving and you're going to start leaning backwards. If you are looking down towards the ground, then you're going to find your body is curving with you and you're not running tall anymore. So this is one where a lot of this issue is just an awareness and a trigger that says, oh, I'm getting tired. I better not lean forward. Like, what am I going to tell myself to bring myself back up to that tall position? So this is usually not like an issue that we're worrying about strength. It's not like you need to worry about neck strength or anything for the most part. It's just more of an awareness issue. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move on to advanced run metrics. And here I'm going to show you some screenshots that are from Garmin. So I'm using Garmin as an example. It seems to be the watch that most people run with. You certainly, there's other watches that have these run metrics. You can pull the metrics off a stride. So they might look different, but they'll all measure mostly the same things here. So the first thing, cadence, and cadence comes on pretty much every watch that's out there now measures cadence. So, but it's important to look at. So here you're measuring your steps per minute, and ideal range is 176 to 184, but everyone is individual. And so there's no like perfectly magical number, but you don't want to see that number down at like 150 or 160, you know, depending on your size and the way that you run, that number may be lower. It may be over 200, but you know, in general, this is sort of the range that we're looking at. Higher cadence tends to be associated with lower vertical oscillation, so less up and down movement, and also a shorter ground contact time. And so here, the first thing I opened up by saying that run speed is a product of two things: how many steps per minute you take and how long your steps are. So these are the two screens that look in that at stride length. So in a perfect world, your cadence is the same, whether you're running a Z1 run or you're running on the track. That's not, you'll see some variation for sure, but you shouldn't see massive changes in your cadence. What you see when you get faster, the big changes are coming from stride length. So the faster you're running, the longer your stride length should be. And again, that's coming from a greater extension back behind you and a strong recoil and driving forward is the stride length, rather than reaching out, overreaching in front of you. Okay, the next thing is the vertical numbers. So I am a super bouncy runner. I keep working on it, and sometimes I'm more successful than the other. My bounce tends to be not from overstriding, but from just accelerating upwards instead of forward. So these numbers, you'll see Garmin color codes everything, and you can kind of go into the information and see what those numbers mean. But yellow and red generally is not what you want to see. So that much I will tell you, it's not the numbers that you want to see. So vertical ratio looks at how high you go versus your stride length, and you want to look for lower ratios here. So how high you go, and vertical oscillation is just a measure of how high up in the air you're running. And again, you want to look for lower numbers. Like, it's nice to see those numbers are more like, 7 or something like that, rather than seeing where mine are at 11. So, but that's, so with the vertical oscillation, if your cadence is high and your stride length is pretty, if your cadence is high and your stride length is pretty good, chances are that vertical number is coming from bouncing up in the air. If on the other hand, you're seeing that your cadence is lower, the oscillation is probably coming because you're bending your knees a lot and you're overstriding. And so you're going up and down because you're bending down in your knee and having to come back up again. So why you see that number depends. So looking at all the metrics together is important. Okay, the next one, ground contact time and balance. So ground contact time is just the amount of time that you spend on the ground. Again, the quicker that you're going, the shorter your ground contact time tends to be. And ground contact balance is left versus right. And here, if you come up and you're seeing numbers that are saying like, I'm 53 versus 47, then you've got some imbalance going on. If you see, 49.6 versus 50.4, maybe not a big deal, but one thing to look at is that imbalance getting greater as the run goes on? It might get less. It might be like, oh, I'm kind of stiff to start with. My right hip's bothering me at the beginning. I ran into it. Now my cadence is pretty good. And then that maybe just tells you need a longer warm up. But if you start out and you're pretty close to 50-50, but as the run goes on, one side becomes more, that you're spending more time with ground contact, then that's showing you something that you have a weakness and that there's an imbalance there that you need to work on. Okay, so now addressing limiters. So I started at the beginning by saying that the limiters pretty much fall within 3 categories, and that's strength or stability, lateral stability mostly, mobility, and cognitive and mental. And then the last one is shoes, because sometimes your shoes will make a weakness more pronounced, or whether the shoe isn't the right shoe for you, or that the shoe is too worn and you need to get a new shoe. If you have like an area, like, so if you're looking, I'll just hit the shoes quick first, and I'll go back to the other ones, is that if you look at the soles of your shoes and you see on one side it's wearing differently than the other, you're going to end up that wear pattern as the shoes get worse. I mean, more worn, they're actually going to cause you to, like, they're going to bring out that weakness more, because the shoe is now uneven, and then it'll keep cycling through. So if you see that you're wearing your shoes unevenly, then it definitely tells you something, but you also want to think about replacing your shoes more frequently because of that as well, so that you're not running on a shoe that's making things worse for you. So the other issues here, so stability, so your side muscles, how well you keep your body side to side. And here it's interesting, because if you're like running, walking, a lot of what we do in life is purely in a forward backwards direction. And so we strengthen our muscles in that direction, but we don't strengthen our lateral muscles unless you're intentionally trying to do that. Versus if you look at a tennis player or a hockey player, their motions are strengthening themselves laterally. I mean, I remember once teaching a class a few years ago, and I went to have some people do like a side plank with leg raises, which is really tough for people that don't have lateral strength if you haven't been working on it. And I had this tennis player that came in that wasn't really like stronger than anyone else. And she walked in, she did it right away without any issues, because there was just more strength there because of what's been developed with her sport. So a lot of the activities that we work on really focus on tightening things up. Primarily the TFL, which is in your sort of the front hip part, and then the glute medius is more towards the back. Glute max is also important for strength. That's more in terms of like pure strength and driving yourself forward and getting the most. So we won't focus on that piece much, but rather more the lateral issues. And then rotational core strength for keeping your upper body nice and tall and your arms moving. Then the mobility, flexibility. Again, this is in the forward and backward position. So your hip flexors, your psoas, which is all the way at the top where your basically think your hip connects to your quad, and then the upper quad. Those tend to get very tight from a lot of things. So if you are sitting in your chair all day, your hip flexors are going to get tight. You're driving, spend a lot of time driving, that's going to tighten your hip flexors. You spend a lot of time on a bike, it's going to tighten your hip flexors. As we get older, our hip flexors just get tighter too. It's just kind of part of the product of the things that you do when you're not running can impact your running a lot. I mean, maybe more in some ways than what you're actually doing running. Your calf muscles and the soleus, that's the longer muscle in your calf. There's two calf muscles, the longer one, and then the rounded area, which is the gastroc. The one that gets tight is the soleus, which runs where the Achilles does. And then, so your chest, your pecs, so how open your chest is. You don't want to be hunched forward when you run. You want to keep yourself nice and open. We spend a lot of our time hunched over on our computer, on our phones. That leads to your chest getting tighter. So it's important to spend some time thinking and opening that. And then your big toe, your range of motion, your big toe can change where your foot position. If you don't have good range in your toe, then it affects where you're toeing off. So those are the areas that mobility is important. And then the last piece being the cognitive piece, the awareness, and then the mental, I'm tired, what do I need to tell myself to bring myself back to hold my run technique. Okay, so what I have done is that I have created this strength routine, which is not like it's not a max strength routine. It's not something that you're going to do early in the season to try to build your overall strength. What it does is it's a good routine to do now. It focuses on your mobility forward and back, and it focuses on your lateral stability. The exercises themselves they're not crazy hard, but they're there to activate the muscles and to try to get yourself lined up, and without taking away from your running at this point. So I did these videos. I did videos of these routines. So I did 4 videos. They're up on our YouTube, the QT2 Systems YouTube channel. And I will, after the video today, you'll receive an email that has the link to today's webinar and also has a link to all of these videos. So if you want to, you can go ahead and go in. If you don't know what the exercises are, you can go in and watch the video and that'll take you through. So this starts out with a warm-up set. So the warm-up set isn't a lot different than something you can do this warm-up set before a run. It has similar exercises to a dynamic warm-up series that you might do before the run, or do these before you start your strength set. Or if you just want to do a little something, every day, you can just do this set. So I start out with just one set of 8. So calf raises, and the calf raises I do in the warm-up set, I do these free. So just off of the floor without trying to touch anything on either side if you can, and just going flat foot and then up as high as you can, just up and back like that. And then the other things, standing knee raises, hamstring curls, side leg swings, back leg springs, regular squats, a set lunge with your arm raise. So you're just doing a set lunge or a split squat and raising the arm on the side of the leg that's back, and then straight leg lunge with twist. So what these do is they just start loosening up. It's loosening up your forward back muscles and then just activating your lateral stabilizers. Then the main set, I have it broken into two sets, really, starting as with floor exercises. And now you'll go back to the calf exercises, but this time doing them one-legged on a step. Then there's a resistance band series to work. So you'll just put something up around your ankles, just over your ankles on these, and side steps and forward and back steps and leg raises and stuff. A deadlift, a single leg squat, a step forward lunge. And the forward lunge is something that if you're training and you want to work more with hills, with Boston is a course that has climbing in it, and especially the downhills get you at the beginning. So to try to strengthen more for the downhills, once you've got that forward lunge mastered and you're stable with it, you can start out standing on a step and then step down from there, and that'll help with the quad strength in the longer position. And then lateral lunge, so a side lunge, and then I have a step series here too, which is using just a foot step. But if you don't have one, you can also use a step stool or stairs in your house or something. And I go through that in some detail in the video. And then the Bulgarian split squat, where your back foot is elevated and you're squatting down. Okay, and then there's floor exercises. So ones that you've probably done here: tight arm push-ups for core strength, mountain climbers for your core and hip stability, side plank switch, this is for your rotational core strength, and then side plank with leg raises for your lateral stability, the straight leg stability ball bridge, and this is for your, again, these are stabilizing muscles for marching bridge and single leg bridge with hip drops, and then the 2-leg bridge with a clamshell. So when I taped these, the main set, I did one set of 8, and it took me around 20 minutes to do the main set between the standing and the floor exercises. So here's where you can start and say, okay, if I want to run through 2 sets, I'm doing the warm up and the cool down. You can start running, like 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes. So it depends on the amount of time you have. And if you look, and I'll say, if you go to do an exercise and it seems really easy, then you're probably strong enough in the exercise. But if you go and you're doing one and you're seeing that you're weak, like you're doing a marching bridge and your hips are dropping, then you might want to spend some more time, like maybe do 2 rounds on that one. Again, because of the time of year, I don't want to push you and tell you need to do like super long strength work, but you can pull out some of these exercises and focus on certain ones, or mix them up and do the leg work, the standing exercises one day, the floor exercises another day. But if you are able to incorporate these into your routine, I think you'll find after a few times through, you already see yourself starting to get more stable. And then just finishing with a cool down routine. So a stretch routine. And these are working just on more the mobility issues. And and where you want to be more open. And also just, so we have some cross knee work and figure 4 to open for your hips, and then the kneeling hip flexor stretch to open up in the forward back position. Downward facing dog for your calf stretches, and the seated toe curl to work on your big toe flexibility. Also a really good one just for stretching out the arches of your feet. And child's pose, just neutralizing your spine when you are done. So some final thoughts that I want to go through is that I start out by saying that you don't want to make a lot of big changes this close to your race day, but you can take steps to optimize your technique throughout the race. So try to, whatever technique you have at the beginning, if you can hold that technique throughout your run, then you're ahead of the game for sure there. So just being aware of that and trying to, if you get stronger, you're more likely to be able to hold that technique, and to be aware if things happen, how you correct yourself. But maybe the more important point I want to make here is that what you do outside of the run counts. It counts a lot. So try to avoid sitting for extended periods of time. Get up, do some stretching. The kneeling hip flexor stretch is great. Do that whenever. Just try to get yourself moved up so that your hip flexors just don't get locked in place. And if you do find yourself sitting, make sure you're not sitting cross-legged, okay? Because that's, as soon as you start sitting cross-legged, your back is going to get twisted. So try to avoid doing those things that are messing up your posture. Think about always sitting tall. So I want to sit like this rather than sitting like this. If I'm sitting like this, everything falls apart. I've lost my core engagement. My shoulders are rolling in. And then what you're doing, if you can't stand tall, you can't run tall. If your posture looks bad when you're standing up and looking at yourself in the mirror, it's going to look 10 times worse when you go out and run. So you really want to keep your posture and focus on your posture as much as you can when you're not running. Be conscious of your movement. Realize that you just crossed your leg and go and uncross it if you can. And then just another thing is take the time to warm up before your runs. You never want to just go on a run and start running the second you walk out the door. Do some walking, do some dynamic warm-ups, do the warm-up routine from the strength routine that I gave you. You can do a light strength routine before you go out on your run. Just get your muscles warmed up before you start to go after them. And then when you're done, after your run is a really good time to take that time to really stretch things out. So that's what I have for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will take people. Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to unmute you. Okay, you can unmute yourself if there is anything that you would like, any kind of questions that you have, or if you want to type anything into the chat box, you are welcome to. So I know that this was a lot of information, and so if you have any questions for me, you can reach me at Reem, R-E-E-M, at therunformula.com, and I'd be happy to answer them. And like I said, after this webinar, we will get the recording up on YouTube and share it with you. And also in the future, if anyone is interested, we're offering a 15% discount on Run Gait Now Switch, which is a service that we offer. So after Boston, if you want to come back and get it done, then that would be a great time. And next week is nutrition. So a question just came through on how can I increase cadence? And increasing cadence actually comes from doing the other things. So if you can increase your hip mobility and get better extension out back, and then driving forward and getting your feet under you, that's going to increase your cadence. It will happen. So rather than thinking about I need to go out and increase cadence, you want to think about the movement, about first of all, spend the time to work on that mobility and work on your hip mobility, and then work on that forward lean, how far you can go into. And then if you get that hip extension, if you work on that, that's automatically going to result in a better kickback and drive forward, and that will in turn increase your cadence. So cadence is more of an outcome that you're getting based on focusing on the other issues. There's things that you can do too. I mean, doing running drills and working on that quickness of technique and the quick touch, soft and quick touch. I mean, that's something that just practicing it and getting used to it, then ultimately the patterns change and your cadence increases. But people talk about going out with a metronome, and I don't know, maybe it just kind of tells you something about your cadence, but it doesn't, I don't know that it helps you go any quicker with your cadence. I know other people would say otherwise to that one though, but again, it's just focusing on the mechanics will in turn increase your cadence. Any other questions? All right, so I will be back with you next week. Beth will be doing the presentation on race fueling, and she'll go over what's on the course and you know, what you can do between now and race day and how you fuel during the race. It's going to be an awesome presentation, and look forward to seeing you again. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out, and thank you very much for participating tonight.